No neighbors?
A few moments later.
Hi there, this is the second tier sound. Anyway, as I was saying, hold on a second.
All right, what can I help you with?
Well, I was just wondering if you can keep it quiet
Right.
a little bit because I'm trying to work
No
here. and it's
problem,
kind of-
Governor.
Sorry about that. I talked to them. They're really nice. They promise they will keep it down, but they also wondered if I could tell you about the new thing they're working on. Hi there, this is Sound with Second Tier Sound. Really nice to see you here. So, Spitfire recently contacted me and wondered if I wanted to check out their new percussion libraries. They have a low percussion and a high percussion. And by the way, they're not sponsoring me, I'm just checking out the libraries for you. Here, you don't get so many drums, but what you do get is a lot of round robins, a lot of dynamic layers. Probably the most deeply sampled ever in history. Showing you all the articulations and sticks on each drum would be quite a lengthy and boring video, so I've done it like this. On the first two drums you will hear everything, so you get an idea of how it works. And then of the rest of the drums, I'm just briefly showing you a little bit how it sounds. But I also put chapters in the video so you can go to the drum you're more interested in. But don't forget, at the end I show you some tricks on how to use these drums, also a little bit about the interface and what I actually think about this library, so don't skip that. The first one is your bass drum, the typical bass drum in an orchestra, also called Gran Casa. Let's also try the other sticks. The first one is quite a hard tone, so let's try the hard felt. Still quite hard, but a little bit rounder, softer. You can hear the drum sings a little bit more, and if you go softer, like medium felt, it's becoming more rumbly here. And then we have a polybeater. What does it say here? It's a plastic polybeater to create a narrow sound with less low frequency. So you can hear a bass drum which doesn't have the low end. We have a super soft, which is basically just a rumble. So then we have the brushes, and I really like this because when you hit softer, it becomes sort of a high percussion sound. And it even has a few very faint sounds up here. Then we have the root on rim, which is more of a high percussion sound. And then lastly, which I won't show you, is all in one. It's basically everything laid out in one keyboard, so you don't have to key switch if that's what you like. So there is also an alternate bass drum, and it's just basically a little bit more of a vintage sound. But they also added the sticks here on this side. Let's listen to the heartfelt. And also a dampened sound, which you basically put a towel or a big piece of fabric on the drum itself. So it doesn't ring so much, much more dry sound. And a medium felt. And then brushes. And then the rods. So you got not just a different sound, but actually a little bit different techniques here as well. Then we have the Bombo, an Argentinian drum. I like the sound of most of these drums, but here's one of my favorite, the buffalo drum. And that's actually a drum that has many sizes, so I guess this is the big one. And I don't know if there is a version that you can put on a stand and play with two hands, because otherwise you normally hold it with one hand and play with the other, and that affects a little bit how you play the drum. And it sounds even nicer in the soft beater. Next we have the very famous and popular Indian Dhol Drum. It's actually a big drum that you put in front of you like this. You hang it on a strap, and it has two drums, one lower and one higher, and you play it with two sticks. So it's quite acrobatic. You can do a lot of very advanced rhythms with it. Then we have the Djuns, actually called Dun-duns, I found out. I know there's a lot of people call it Djun or Djun-djuns, but Dun-dun is the right name, and it's a West African drum that is sort of the bass drum of a big Djembe ensemble. Then we have the dragon drums. And if I understand this is actually a kind of dagu drum from China that is very big and bassy. But despite it being very large and bassy, it's actually a very quick and acrobatical instrument, so to speak. The epic toms are basically two massive four toms in opposite to each other, and they sound like this. Then there is a giant taiko. Taiko is Japanese and actually means any drum. But for us non-Japanese people, we usually think about these big round traditional drums used with two sticks, usually somebody jumping around. It's a whole experience, a whole performance. There are actually bigger taiko drums, but then they're becoming a little bit less playable, and it's more about the bigness and the experience of that. So this is a giant taiko that is still very playable. And then we have the Gong bass drum that I actually didn't know of before this. So it's a type of drum that uses a single large drum head, almost imagining like a gong. Here we have the Surdo, a Brazilian bass drum often used in samba. And as I try the sound here, I really like it, but I feel like it's normally not that echoey when you use the Surdo. You have it outside. So I want to change the mic a little bit. So we're going to turn down the mix 1 here and maybe have a little bit of section overhead. And let's try a bit more up close. Let's see if that's... Yeah, it's pretty good. Let me have a little bit overhead. We can even have 2... So you can actually play a lot with the sound here. This is not perfect, but just a little bit more what the Surdo sounds like to me when it's not in a big concert hall. And also I'm going to try all in one here because usually you use both hands and sticks with the Surdo in order to dampen the sound a little bit. You have to imagine the rest of the ensemble playing on top of the Surdo. And then we have some more Taikos. Apparently these are not as giant as the one before. And then we have toms, 4 different toms, very expressive, very nice, and you get 4 of them. So that's all the low percussion. Let's go over to the high percussion and let's start with bongos, which is very deeply sampled. For example, first we have the left drum, and also then fingers. Then we go to the right drum, which is first open, hands and closed, and even fingers, and closed. So there's a lot of variety here. And you even get them with sticks. Everybody probably knows about bongos breaking because some kid got hold of a stick. Anyway, let's go on. Then we have the congas, and it's just impressively well sampled. And here is also a darbuka. And then we have the djembe. And also it comes with brushes, which is not so common when you play African drums, but it is still quite a nice addition. And here we have a field drum, and if you wonder what a field drum is, it's basically a marching snare that is quite deep and has a bigger, rounder tone. Now, the rolls are built in, so for example, and they're nice. But I find with 2 fingers, you can actually do this quite well, depending on what sound you use. For example, I find you can have a little bit more control that way. But it has quite a lot of different sounds. So you have sort of sharper hitting rim shot, sticks, a little bit softer, even softer. And then obviously also rolls. And even softer. So you get a lot there. And then you can have it also with this snare off. And here you can hear that the field drum is much bigger and has a rounder, bassier tone. All right, and then brushes. Then we have log drums, and they usually come in several sizes, so you can do, and you can hear they're great for comedic writing. But also kind of a little bit more rhythmic African style. And they also included the mini bongos, which is funny because they're kind of like the bongos, but just have a higher pitch. And then we have the Octobans. They look really cool if you haven't seen this before. Very long sort of drums, and percussionists in orchestras like to show off with these. And then we actually have 2 piccolo snares. So unlike the field drum, which is very low in its sound, the piccolo snare is very up there. And this is how you see that this sample is very deeply sampled, because you get so many options of how to hit the drum and where you hit the drum. And then with brushes. Perfect for, you know, Second World War secret mission. Briefly, I'm just going to show you the different Piccolo Snare, just a little bit different sound. Then we have plastics. I like this edition. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm assuming it's different bottles and kegs that you're hitting with sticks. Then we have Roto Toms, and if you haven't seen them before, they look like very thin toms without any buckets, so to speak. A little bit spacey, and they come in a set of 3 or 4. In this case, it's 4. Then we have the Shime Daiko. I think it's pronounced that way. It's also a Japanese drum, but much smaller this time. It's usually used in a larger ensemble, and it's quite important that there is a performance as well. I can't really do that this time, but let's listen to how it sounds. And then we have a snare. Before we looked at the field drum and the piccolo, but this is the in the middle normal snare. And then we have the tempo blocks, and somebody much more intelligent than me will know the difference between log drums and tempo blocks. I think they're both made of wood, but basically it's the pitch probably, and a little bit how they sound, how big they are. So here we go. And then we have the timbales, and you're probably the most used to hear them. But they have quite a few other uses, depending on how you hit with the stick. So. And now we have toys. But I find that the recording is a little bit too soft. You really have to crank up the volume if you want to hear this. But maybe they want it to be accurate in sort of, if it's really heard if you compare it to the other instruments. But it's nice that they're here. You have castanets. And then we have claves, which comes in 3 sets. So. And then we have the cachichi. I actually don't know how you pronounce that thing. And it's very softly recorded. And then the guiro. Maracas. Ratchet. And then shakers. And lastly, a vibra slap. And then we have woodblocks. And again, somebody more intelligent than me would tell me what the difference is. I know they look different and all that, but I kind of feel like they are almost the same thing. Let's take a quick look at the interface, because I think Spitfire has done an excellent job here, and there are also a few features you really should know to get the most out of the library. The first thing is that you can really drag this window and resize it to any size you want. Very important. It really makes a difference depending on what monitor you have. The second thing I really like here is that it shows what you're playing. If you hover your mouse over the keys here, it will show you on this side here if it's the left hand or the right hand. But not only that, you see I can play with two hands down here. But that might be a little bit difficult to do. So rather than doing that, there's also a sample set up here. It's the same sample set, it's just that it's easier to play by having the hands a little bit spread out, more like you're playing an actual drum. If you don't like that feature, you can just turn it off here. The key switches are really important because most of you might just use the normal key switches that you find down here, for example. But I prefer to use the MIDI channel option, and I find that this is incredibly important. That means that you choose the articulations with the actual MIDI channel, so you don't need to do any key switching ever. And they also have other options of doing that, and I wish that more companies would pay attention to this. Very important small little step. One thing that you might forget is that there are 3 dots up here, and you should really take a look at those. You have quite a few options here. Most of them are obvious, but let's take a look at a few of them here. The voice choking means that if you use a roll, as soon as I hit another key, that roll will turn off even if I hold the roll key down. You can also have the roll end off. That means that there's no end sample when I lift the roll. That might be something you want to do if you have the voice choking, so you don't get 2 hits by mistake. Otherwise, it sounds like this. You see, there's an end sample there at the end of the roll. Soft takeover is not on by default, but I think it should be. That means that I can actually control the dynamics with how hard I hit the keys on my rolls. Normally, if it's off, then it's the mod wheel that controls the dynamics. So let's put that on, and now I can hit softly or hard. But not only that, if I start softly, now, if I move the mod wheel, you might think, oh, that's going to be a jump in dynamics. But not at all. It's going to not do anything until it matches my dynamics. Look. There it is. So in that way, I don't get any surprises. Also, I wanted to mention that the mic options are insane and incredible because you do get a lot of instruments that way. Well, I mean, this is just a bass drum, right? But by changing and doing a lot of combinations here, you get so many new different sounds that you haven't thought about, and you have a lot of options. This is quite fantastic, maybe a little bit daunting, but I really encourage you to experiment here and just have fun and see what happens. One thing to note though, it does say close spot signals only. So you might try to move around while you have the mix option, but you won't hear any changes. So you have to use, for example, the close mics to have any effect with this one. The effects, just mentioning briefly that the reverb, it's not really a big difference. And you should see it's 0, but it's still very wet. So if you have more of that, you just get more of the room sound. A bigger tail, you could say. If you want no reverb, you have to do that with the mic positions. Tightness is very subtle, and if I understand this correctly, it's about where the samples start. So if you have more tightness, you have less transients, and it might be easier to play with that. But I find that the sound is the best down here, even though it's very subtle, and I also find that it's easy enough to perform even the tightness is off. I wanted to give you a few hints and tips on how you use this library, but also how you create drums in general. Enjoy. So a mistake that a lot of people do is that they take one patch and they go. Now, with this library, it kind of actually works because it's a very expressive and dynamic instrument here. But you also have played all your cards if you do this. You don't really have anything you can add to this because it's so much going on. Think of the percussion ensemble as a string or brass ensemble. In general, not always, but in general, you tend to not have too many advanced rhythms and harmonies in the lower section of any ensemble. We could think of the drums in that way as well. So if I have this part here, rather than doing all that, I can think of more emphasis because that's what the bass drum is really good at doing. Now, the giant Taiko is very nice, but I want even more emphasis, and that's something that is very important actually, to add several layers of drums. We can have even more bass emphasis here. But one trick that people forget is that why not tune the drum? Let's just tune it down a smidge. We get this, maybe even more, it's so fun. Like a really, really low drum here. Another trick, actually, which I forgot to mention, is that I do quantize these, but I don't have 100%. I usually have like 60% more or less, so it's not super, super perfect. I really like the sound of the dragon drums, so let's try that as well. Adding a few Taikos on top, having pretty much the same rhythm, is actually a pretty good idea, because now we have a different sound, and that adds to the picture, making it bigger. The Gong bass drum is very snappy, so it's nice to have as an extra attack. I've used a lot of bass drums here, and you don't have to use that many, but I also wanted to show that you can, if you play it out right, use a lot of bass drums with different parts to make it dynamic. So let's put in a Bombo here. Actually, I do like that, but I'm gonna remove this first part. I want it to come in later. There we go. So let's put some epicness in here with these. We need some response here as well. Let's try that. Let's add a little bit more response with some epic toms here. We're missing a little bit the higher parts now. We need some faster rhythm. Let's actually use the bass drum here. It has to stick here. Let's try that. I think we need a few Octobans here as a response. Snares are actually excellent, not just as their own rhythm, but to actually get emphasis because they have a high register. And if you play them a little bit more faint, you just get a nicer, sharper attack to the other drums. Roto Toms also have a nice high register. Alright, that's pretty much it, I think. Now, I can always go in and tweak it a little bit, remove some mistakes, and change the dynamics a little bit. I'm gonna do that quickly now. Alright, I've messed just a little bit with the dynamic layers, fixed up some problems, and it sounds like this. One trick I really like with this library is that you can make it sound like an ensemble just using one drum. For example, if I have a simple pattern here. Then what I will do here is that I can actually go in and I want to leave the tuning as it is, and I'm going to go into the mics here. I'm going to remove the mix 1, have quite a bit of overhead. I mean, you can do whatever you want here. I'm just trying something. Then I want a little bit of close as well. Maybe we can mix in a little bit of the mix there. And then I'm going to drag this one to the right. Let's see what this sounds like. So a little bit more closer, yeah? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this track, but not the data. And I'm just going to, call it Dhol Drums 2, so we know. And I'm going to perform pretty much the same pattern here. But before we do that, I'm going to actually tune this one up just a smidge. We can see we can do the same thing here. And we just move this one over to the left quite a bit. And just for fun, we have a different mix here. We can also pan this slightly. All right. There we go. And let's copy one more. And let's have another pattern here. Like 3. And let's open this one up. And let's tune it down the other way. Maybe pan it quite a bit. And just for fun, we'll make it more spacey, normal mix. Sorry, I go up here. That one. All right, there we go. Yeah, I wasn't super tight there, to be honest. But as you can see, you can quite quickly create a very nice ensemble feel that feels very natural, and you can really place the different places out in a big space. You have a lot of options with panning, with mics, and even with the tuning itself. So let's talk about what I think about this library. Well, I'm not finished yet.
Sorry, Governor.
All right, sorry about that. So it's a very deeply sampled library, probably the most deeply sampled library out there, at least as far as I know. But you really feel this. It might be hard to transmit on a YouTube video, but it's very responsive. You get so inspired. You really want to try more things. It's like you're actually playing the drums. I'm not a percussionist, but I really wanted to try more things out. What else can I do with these? And you can really sculpt the sound with all the mic positions, the different sticks in different positions, and actually where you place the drums in the room as well. So this is probably a library for a professional user. By all means, if you want to get it, do it, but I recommend you to maybe not go with this first because it's quite advanced and you need to know a little bit what you're doing in terms of playing, and it's quite expensive as well, especially if you're getting both. But if you want that next level, if you really want to go deeper into your drum libraries, then this might be it. I think it's probably the best library out there. Now, some problems I have with it, it's a very large library. This is understandable if you consider all the options that are in there, but it's almost 100 gigabytes per library. And that's gonna take a dent in your hard drive. And I really would love it if Spitfire could make it so that you can download only certain mics, just like the Sign Engine is doing with Orchestra tools. It's good to have all the mics, they're very important, I get it, but it would be nice to be able to just download one, because sometimes you're probably only gonna use the Mix 1 or Tree 1 and that's it, and at least when you're trying things out. It's also rather expensive, especially if you're considering getting both. Hopefully they are making a bundle out of this in the future. I don't know this. I've asked them, but they haven't told me. If you really want to get these libraries and you can only afford one right now, I highly recommend you to get the low percussions first. It's just more fun. The high percussion is great. It sounds fantastic and it's really good and worth it, but the low percussion has a more variety. I find that you can also act as a high percussion with all the sticks and different tones the way you play it, so you can do quite a bit with that one. So that's it for this review. I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed playing with these drums, and thanks again to Spitfire for letting me try these out. So if you enjoyed my videos, you can always help me out by hitting the like button. Write me a comment what you think about the review or the drums, or if you know anything better, or if you're getting them or anything like that. But you can also subscribe to get more videos like this one, and if you really want to support me, you can always become a patron if that makes sense to you. But otherwise, let people know about my videos and watch more of my videos. That also helps me a lot. So thank you very much for sticking through, and I hope until next time you create a lot of music and have a good time. Take care.